Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see so many of you on the line. My name is Kristen Stevens, and I am the head of Congressional Affairs and Strategic Engagement for the Halo Trust USA. I'd like to start off by thanking my colleague Maven Davis-Rackerby for coordinating this event. I'd like to thank the Mines Advisory Group and specifically Dave Bloom for co-hosting this event focused on the critical threat of landmines and other explosive remnants of war in Syria. Thank you to our panelists for being here, who I will introduce momentarily, and thank you all for joining today. Before we begin, I'd like to just remind everyone that we will have Q&A at the end of the session after we hear from our panelists. Feel free to submit questions through Zoom at any point, and we will answer those as we come to the end of the webinar. As the world's two largest humanitarian demining organizations and U.S. partners, HALO and MAG both understand firsthand the deadly threat of landmines and other explosives left over from conflict. Today, in nearly 60 countries and territories, landmines are still claiming lives and limbs of civilians all around the world. But fortunately, with strong bipartisan support from Congress and support from the U.S. State Department, specifically the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, as well as the Department of Defense and USAID, partners like HALO and MAG are working around the world to remove landmines and other explosives, to educate civilians on how to stay safe until we're able to completely remove all the explosives, and we're able to help communities thrive after conflicts and create a more secure world. We are here today to talk about Syria, one of today's most pressing crises. Syria is facing a humanitarian catastrophe as civilians return to their homes to find their communities contaminated with deadly explosives left over from more than a decade of civil war. Already since the fall of the Assad regime in December, HALO has recorded nearly 300 civilian casualties from landmines, IEDs, and other explosives, including 98 children. Right now, Syria is at a critical turning point as it transitions away from the Assad regime and towards a more hopeful democratic future. But clearing mines and explosive remnants of war will remain essential to any recovery goals. So with that, I'm seeing that Congresswoman Houlahan has not quite joined the webinar yet, so we will be hearing from her later during this session. But with that, let me introduce our panelists, starting with Andrew Moore, who is HALO's Regional Director for the Middle East, North Africa, and Afghanistan. Andrew has worked for HALO since 2005 and has managed previously demining operations in Mozambique, Angola, Afghanistan, Kosovo, and Georgia. And in his previous role, as Regional Director for Europe, he was responsible for developing fundraising for Kosovo and Nagorno-Karabakh. We'll also hear from Najat El Hamri, MAG's Regional Director for the Middle East. She has over 20 years of experience in international development and has held a wide variety of senior positions within NGOs working in both programs and policy across the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. And she has also led MAG's activities across the Middle East since 2021. A bit later, we'll be joined by Charles Lister, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and their director of Syria and Countering Terrorism and Extremism programs. His work focuses on all things Syria and on issues of terrorism and insurgency across the Levant. Within MEI, Lister currently directs two major international initiatives focused on Syria, resolving the detainee crisis and the Syria Strategy Project. Prior to joining MEI, Lister was a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution in Qatar and a senior consultant to the multinationally backed Syria Track 2 Dialogue initiative, in which he managed nearly 3 years of intensive face-to-face engagement with the leaderships of over 100 Syrian armed opposition groups. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew Moore to kick off the discussion. And I'll turn it over to you, Andrew. Thank you very much again for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So very briefly, HALO is along with MAG, the two largest landmine clearance NGOs in the world. We were established at similar times, HALO in 98, and I think MAG either the same year or the following year. So it's a pleasure to be sharing a platform with my colleague Najat. HALO is currently working in 32 countries around the world. We're best known for clearing landmines. but we also help fragile states to manage their weapons and ammunition to stop them falling into illicit hands, and we pretty much deal with anything that goes bang, barring nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Could I ask you to move on 2 slides, please? HALO's been working in northwest Syria since 2018. Syria has been fragmented, as you know, and divided essentially into 3 areas: the northwest, the territory that was controlled by the regime, and northeastern Syria. We were working out of Idlib, and you can see a lot of dots on this map. These are the areas that we conducted impact survey in 2019 and 2020. You'll see some of those areas subsequently fell to the Assad regime, but we've since 2021 we've been with a small team clearing landmines and destroying explosive ordnance. We have 40 staff currently in Idlib. We would like to have had a bigger capacity, but funding for this particular part of Syria has been particularly difficult. But one thing we have been able to do is make 40% of our workforce women, and we're aiming in the future for parity between men and women in our employment. As a consequence of us working in Idlib, we've had a reasonable relationship with the de facto authorities there, the Syrian Salvation Government, the people who are now essentially ruling most of Syria. That was an arm's length relationship. We're very mindful of the sanctions regime, but I'm happy to say that they did not interfere in our employment or in our programming. We consulted with them, but they allowed us to work uninterrupted. And the other key criterion for our work in the recent years has been that we have not been able to work near the front lines. It was too dangerous. That said, despite that, our teams have been overwhelmed with work in recent years and have had more work than we've been able to deal with. Next slide, please. Kristen, would you like me to go over to Congresswoman Houlahan?
So that would be fantastic. So I'd like to welcome and introduce Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan. Thank you so much for being on the line, and Andrew will come back to you shortly. Congresswoman Houlahan chairs the Unexploded Ordnance and Demining Caucus and is a champion of humanitarian demining programs. Thank you so much for being here, Congresswoman, and I will turn it over to you for a few remarks.
And I appreciate that, and I'm so sorry to interrupt what is a really remarkable and important and in-depth conversation. Good morning, and apologies again for being late. Miscommunication on timing. I can't stand being late. My name is Chrissy. I represent Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District, and very, very proud, as you mentioned, to serve as one of the co-chairs of the Unexploded Ordnance and Demining Caucus, which is, of course, a bipartisan caucus here in Congress. And thank you to all of you all who are here for this important briefing, and to HALO Trust and to MAG for hosting and organizing this really important conversation. I'm personally a veteran, a member of the Armed Services Committee as well. Additionally, I am the daughter of a veteran, granddaughter of veterans, and my father was born in Lviv, what is now in Ukraine. So I have seen firsthand and understand firsthand the devastating and lasting impacts of war that can happen on communities across the world. Landmines and other kinds of reminders of war will remain a serious threat for decades, as we know, after the fighting ends, and they will present some of the most immediate dangers to the civilians who are trying to return to their homes and to their lives and livelihoods. These hidden dangers don't distinguish, of course, between soldiers and civilians, and they affect every aspect of life in impacted communities. And it's, of course, particularly true in the area that we're talking about and focusing on today, which is Syria, where there has been a widespread presence of explosives for a long time, and it has had devastating impact on communities across the country, and of course will continue to. The continued presence of these remnants of wars makes it very difficult for Syrians to access huge pieces of their land all over the country, making things like farming and the distribution of humanitarian aid, and even utilizing basic services extremely difficult. So with the fall of the Assad regime in December, thousands of displaced Syrians will be and are finally able to return home. But though, as folks have begun to come back to their communities, they've encountered these unexploded ordnances and landmines that will plague and have plagued their families and neighbors, and even those who have stayed, of course, as well. These weapons that are remaining have already claimed dozens of lives and unfortunately will likely claim more as well. And the humanitarian crisis in Syria is one of the most dire crises in the world. The overwhelming presence of unexploded bombs and landmines severely compounds all of the concerns for the health and safety and future of the Syrian people. Demining efforts will definitely play an essential role in Syria's ability to recover from this war and its ability to build a lasting stability in the area. Peace and stability are very, very hard to accomplish when weapons of war are still claiming lives. I really appreciate this State Department's Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement and their help in managing the U.S. conventional weapons destruction programs and the work of organizations like HALO for conducting this really important work. And I really appreciate all of you all for joining this conversation. Again, my deepest apologies for being tardy. Please encourage your bosses, those of you who are here on the Hill on this line today, to join me and my co-chair Rep. David Valadeo in this bipartisan caucus so that we can continue to support and expand these demining efforts that will allow children to go to school, communities to grow, and people to live without fear. Thank you again. Please be well, and I'll pass the baton back to the organizers and to our great presenter.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Houlahan. We really appreciate your remarks. And Andrew, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Houlahan. So our work in Northwest Syria is divided into two key areas: explosive ordnance disposal, destroying abandoned and unexploded weapons, and then landmine clearance, which I'll talk about separately. Frankly, there are enormous quantities of unexploded ordnance across Syria, both in the northwest and the rest of the country. And I've visited regime-controlled territory twice in the last few years, and was astonished at the amount of ordnance that I saw lying around by the roads in communities. As I've mentioned, our explosive ordnance disposal teams were already working capacity prior to the fall of the regime, and this here shows a well next to a displaced persons camp. It's common in northwest Syria when you find ordnance to drop it down the well so that it removes the immediate risk to children especially. However, what happens then is the well can't be maintained. It's not safe to be maintained, so that the well can't be used. And furthermore, the water sources are contaminated with explosives. So this is a really key problem in Syria across the north. And just from this well alone, we removed 1,400 explosive items. Next slide, please. We've also been clearing minefields, and this is a very typical situation in northwest Syria. Again, the regime forces would often set up on hilltops, and then in olive groves they would lay mines near the trees, so that the trees could not be used for cover and assault on the positions. But what that means is that when farmers return to their land to start harvesting olives, a crop that you may think is relatively easy to tend and they readily return to doing, they encounter the landmines with devastating consequences. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Maven. As I mentioned earlier, we've managed to employ 40% of our staff as women in northwest Syria, and I like this particular quote from Seba, one of our explosive ordnance disposal technicians. Every time we successfully dispose of a dangerous item, we all look at each other and clap hands. We appreciate that as a team we're able to make another place safe for people to live in. So this is the driving ethos of our team in northwest Syria, and this is what we need to expand across Syria now that the regime has fallen. Next slide, please. So what has changed? Well, we now have access across the country. We were confined to the northwest. Previously, we now have access across the country. Because of our previous connections with the Syrian Salvation Government, we've had regular meetings with ministers, and they've permitted us to work wherever there is a need. The trouble is that it's not only HALO that has access and other NGOs that have access across the country, but so do the people of Syria. And as already been mentioned, we've recorded from open sources 287 deaths and injuries since the fall of the regime in less than 6 weeks. This is collected from open sources, as there's no formal means of gathering information at the moment, and is undoubtedly underreporting. Now we can see from this that There are lots of accidents along the Euphrates River in Deir ez-Zor, but the highest concentration of the accidents are in Idlib and Aleppo along the old front lines, where until a few weeks ago the regimes of forces were standing off against those of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and their partner organisations. Since the fall of the regime, our staff have been utterly overwhelmed with requests for explosive ordnance disposal. Our phones are constantly ringing, and vehicles are being flagged down in the streets and taken to see things that need to be disposed of safely. Next slide, please. There are minefields across the country, but they're especially dense in the northwest, and that's reflected in the accidents there as well. People are coming back to their homes and entering what they don't know are minefields and having accidents. These are anti-tank mines that have been abandoned by the Syrian army, so they're not particularly dangerous, but they do need to be destroyed safely. But there are lots of minefields that are active. And next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. And this is a minefield that our team visited only yesterday. You can see the trench line here, former Syrian army position, and mines were laid again in an olive grove. The landowner told us how his neighbour hired a man with a metal detector, a civilian, to come and clear the area for him, and then the man with the detector was killed as he was trying to clear mines, and the landowner was injured himself. The front lines here are more than 250 kilometres long. We don't know just how much of them have been mined, but we urgently need to conduct survey to map those minefields and then to begin clearance. There's a very significant problem. Next slide, please. We are helped unusually. It's not often we get this, but we've been given some of the Syrian army's maps. So that does improve the process of survey, but it doesn't alter the need for it to happen or the importance of clearance. Next slide, please. And then the other key element of our work is explosive ordnance disposal in support of reconstruction. I took this picture 2 years ago in rural Damascus. And there are huge swathes of Syria that have been destroyed. There is lots of explosive ordnance within these ruined buildings and in the streets around them. So for Syria to be rebuilt, we need to have a very large-scale explosive ordnance disposal capacity that can respond whenever dangerous items are found, and either remove them if they can be moved or destroy them promptly so the construction can happen. Next slide, please. So what are the key needs? Well, we expect millions of people to return to areas with minefields and explosive ordnance, and they don't know where they are. So there's a need to teach them of those risks, mark the areas that are dangerous, and support them with mine clearance and destruction of ordnance. Fortunately, at the moment, we're not seeing movement at the scale we might have expected. That's largely because the internally displaced people, with it being winter, are remaining in camps before returning to their homes. And then I'm glad to say that the reports seem to suggest that countries such as Turkey are being quite responsible in the way in which they're promoting return. It's a gradual return so that Syria isn't inundated. But still, it doesn't alter the fact that we'll have many tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people returning each year, and they need to know the risk that they face. So the minefields need to be surveyed and cleared. Then the destruction across Syria is believed to be greater than that in Gaza. So this will need, as I've mentioned, a very large explosive ordnance disposal support for Syria to be rebuilt safely. Next slide, please. There are challenges. We're extremely grateful to OFAC and the US Treasury Department for relaxing the sanctions regime on Syria, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham remains proscribed, and it's not clear to us what the position is relating to dual-use equipment. Neighbouring countries, especially Jordan, for example, are taking a very cautious approach to that at the moment. So in order to clear mines, we'll need to get metal detectors and explosive ordnance disposal equipment into the country. It's a suspension of the sanctions regime as well, or relief. So we'll need some security beyond that in being able to take equipment into Syria. That also means that donors are extremely careful about their funding. They're watching some of them to see the nature of the new government, when actually the needs for funding to do what we do is now, so that we can stop people being killed immediately. The new government hasn't the capacity to manage the response itself, so there'll need to be coordination mechanisms set up by the NGOs and the various organisations doing this work ourselves, probably with UN support, in order to manage that in the meantime. And then there's the simple scale of the problem. It is enormous. And so prioritization will be difficult. We'll need to know where to put our assets, where to prioritize clearance. And that will be a challenge in itself. We should also note that you'll have seen in the news that Israel has been heavily bombing Syrian ammunition stores. That creates a huge amount of contamination as the ammunition is thrown out. These will need to be cleared up in due course. And in order to minimize proliferation in the region, those weapons will need to be secured as well. But this presents a unique opportunity to stabilize Syria. I think what we do in making people safe, in securing explosives, is really important. It plays a really important role, not just in humanitarian intervention, not just in rebuilding, but in the stabilization of Syria and the wider region. Next slide, please. And finally, I'd just like to humanize this. This is the tragedy of one family. On the 5th of December, Abdul Karim Abdul Hai returned with his family to his home on the front lines, the home was close to a former Syrian army position. Prior to the war, the land, much of what they own, we can see in this picture here. It provided all of their income, and they were overjoyed when they were able to return to their homes. On the day of that return, Abdul Karim went straight into the land to view the state of the trees and the land and the crops, and to gather some firewood to heat their home. He took some of the children with him. He and his 6-year-old daughter, you can see Rayan in this picture here, they found a strange item they picked up. It turned out it was a landmine, and it exploded instantly, killing them both straight away. Mohammed Abdul Karim's wife, who's now a widow and the family's breadwinner has been lost, said, "They stole the joy of our return to the land and planted death everywhere." This is one family's tragedy, but as we've seen from the casualty figures, this is a tragedy that's repeating itself across Syria. And my fear is that we're just seeing the start of that. And as many more people return, if we're not able to intervene, we'll see much more death and many more families like Abdul Karim's family here. And on that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Najat for her to talk about Mag's brilliant work in Syria as well.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. You as well doing amazing work in Syria and across the globe. So good morning, everyone. Najat from Mines Advisory Group, known as MAG. MAG is a humanitarian organization specializing in mine action, including clearance of explosive ordnance, risk education and capacity development of local national mine action authorities together with the local organizations. But our strongest pillar as well is around weapon and ammunition management. So we were founded in 1989 and we work across 40 countries globally. We have across the globe around 6,000 staff working in countries that have been affected by conflict and armed violence. In the Middle East region, specifically, we have been working in the Middle East region since 1992. We've been operating in Iraq for more than 30 years and working in Lebanon for more than 20 years, and now in Syria, specifically in northeast Syria for nearly 10 years now. So across the Middle East region, we have around 1,000 staff. Established across all these countries, and recently we have been operating in Gaza and West Bank, and we have now a new presence in Jordan, which we just started our weapon and ammunition management work in September last year through the support of the US. So in 2024 alone, we've cleared more than 6 million square meters of land, and we reach around 315,000 people with explosive ordnance risk education, as well as digital risk education campaigns. As Andrew just mentioned earlier, all explosive ordnance remains a critical issue across the region, hindering development effort, having access to land, reconstructions, rehabilitation. It's preventing also people from returning to their land. So obviously, Mike is committed to responding to emerging mine action crisis across the region, and in partnership with local organizations and international organizations as well, who are the front line delivering aid. Next slide, please. As far as Northeast Syria program is concerned, so we started our operation in 2016 through direct implementation in Hasaka and Raqqa governorate. We've been expanded in eastern Aleppo, but also working in northern Dar es Zur. Previously, we used to work in northwest Syria, delivering explosive ordnance risk education in Aleppo, Idlib, and Eastern Ghouta, but we also worked in Daraa and Sweda, and we did some non-technical service activities in Dar es Zur. At the moment, our focus is on northeast Syria, where we are essentially operational in Raqqa and Hasaka. So far, we have around 250 staff. We have 9 mine action clearance team, 10 community liaison team, and a fleet of mechanical asset. We have around 12 mechanical asset deployed across the 2 governorate. As we know, the contamination of northeast Syria is really large. ISIS has left a massive contamination legacy behind, and this is added with the cluster munition and other conventional explosive ordnance. At the moment, it is recorded that as per the baseline data that has been produced in northeast Syria, there is around 38 million of square meters of land being contaminated. So this is the situation in northeast Syria. Next slide, please. In terms of program achievement, since 2016, we've delivered around we actually supported 880,000 people. We reached them with explosive ordnance risk educations. We surveyed around 100 and cleared 170 community facilities, and we destroyed around 81,000 explosive items. Since 2016, we have cleared more than 48 million of square meter of land. I just wanted to share with you this very interesting case study around the work we've been doing with the local council, with the schools specifically. We've been delivering explosive ordnance risk education. We've been training teachers. We developed a booklet, and this is one of the pictures of our teachers being receiving their certificate for receiving explosive ordnance risk education, and for them to disseminate amongst the students in the classes. So this is one of the achievements we have been doing, and this has been a long, obviously, effort negotiating to integrate this into the curriculum. And this year we will continue to deliver those sessions. Next slide, please. So just wanted to give you a bit of update on the work we've been doing with the US support. So the US have been supporting, WRA has been supporting MAG in Northeast Syria in 2017 and still continue to support Northeast Syria. We have been doing we've been doing mine action, humanitarian mine action clearance. We've been doing explosive ordnance risk education, and this is across Hasaka and Raqqa and northern Dar es Zur. So since 2017, we managed to release 13 million of square of land with the support of the US, and which has benefited 34,000 people. I just wanted to give you this example again of a local school which was heavily contaminated, and it was actually previously used as an ISIS base where they used to store the explosive ordnance. So we received a call from one of the local organizations. We do work a lot in partnerships with local organizations who really wanted to refurbish that school, who wanted to make sure that children could go back to school. So they did approach MAG at the time, where we deployed our mechanical asset and our team, and we cleared that school, which is now free from explosive ordnance. So this is just to show you a picture of children now resuming, and hopefully will be rehabilitated. Next, please. So in terms of whole of Syria response, so MAG has been working in Northeast Syria, as I said, since 2016. I was in Damascus last week trying to explore a possibility to look into having some presence across the whole Syria region. So I've been engaging with the various stakeholders, the coordination meetings. And so the idea for MAG going forward, obviously looking into the future, giving the needs, as Andrew mentioned, we've been receiving a lot of requests from local organizations, for community members, that they really want to resume their life, they want to go back to their land, but they found their houses with explosive ordnance, and there's a lot of contamination. Again, there is no baseline. So MAG will continue to address the need in Northeast Syria because there are still huge needs. As I mentioned, 38 million of square still being recorded as contaminated. However, we are also exploring to see if there is a scope to potentially expand our work across the whole Syria if access becomes permissive. And obviously, there's other aspects to look into. This is an aspect that we are looking into at the moment. And as Andrew mentioned, there've been a lot of recorded of incidents that has been shared by various partners over the past few weeks since the regime fall. Next slide, please. In terms of key challenges and priorities, so from what has been gathered during the various meetings we held with international organizations, Humanitarian Mine Action Organization, the White Helmet, and UNMAS and the HAG, there is that I just wanted to list down here some of the key challenges that have been shared with me during my visit. One of the main one is the return is UNHCR has now recorded that 160,000 people are now returning to Syria. We've been speaking with various international organizations, including now, Amman this week, been meeting with an international organization where they were meeting with refugees in Za'atari camp, where people want to return. However, one of the points which was flagged to them is contamination, that they're going to go into completely demolished land, but also houses, but also their fear of their house being contaminated from what's been reported. One area is around coordination. As my colleague mentioned just now, Andrew, we've been working in various parts in Syria, northeast, northwest, and the previous regime control area. So there have been different coordination mechanisms. Now the question is, how do we harmonize this coordination going forward? And what we've met with the some various stakeholders as well. What we felt is like the new government is welcoming organization, wants organized to coming. Humanitarian Mine Action came as one of the strongest one. They know that the recovery effort, constructions effort will not happen until lands and houses have been completely clear from the UXOs they've been experiencing. So there is a push and there is a need for us to intervene. However, so at the moment they are falling into a new structure. So it's going to take a bit of time before we can say we have a full established coordinating mechanism. Access as well is becoming, as I mentioned just now, become big issues. Access within roads, access to the land, access to houses, which is becoming a serious concern for not just the community, but also for international organizations wanting to deliver support, to the community on the ground. So our work is a prerequisite to all this effort. Sanction has been mentioned obviously as one of the areas which is blocking some of the humanitarian work, although we have obviously can only speak about Northeast Syria, where we did not face any challenges per se. We were getting US funding, and there have been no issues. But I think from what we've been hearing, for those who were in Damascus, for example, or they did obviously suffered a lot from the sanctions, and this is still preventing for them to deliver some activities, to deliver their work with the suppliers, with the designated name. So there is still some it does hinder. And at the end, the ones who are really suffering the most is the community as well. So that's why we hope that it's something that can be looked into very, 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 very soon. Funding, we don't know what will be the scale of funding needed to respond to the needs on the ground. They are just huge, and this is without a contamination baseline data. And there is a lot of effort that needs to be done to conduct non-technical surveys to really determine what is the scale. And as Andrew mentioned just now, prioritizations, funding is very needed. And like, as I mentioned, a recovery effort, emergency response, constructions, we're not even at the level of construction yet, need to really put at the forefront funding also for humanitarian mine action to be able to, for other operators to intervene. So this is just some sort of summary challenges and key priority which have been gathered during my visit in Damascus last week. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And with that, we will turn it over to Charles Lister with the Middle East Institute, who I provided the introduction to earlier, but we'll turn it over to him for a bit more context beyond just demining on what's going on in Syria, most recently reflections on current developments, etc.
Great. Thanks so much, Kristen. And sorry I was only able to join in the second half of this session. But yeah, I'll just provide a little bit of bigger picture, I guess, remarks, and then concentrate down to the challenge that Najat was just walking us all through in terms of the demining and UXO challenge. I mean, first of all, the obvious. Syria's experienced absolutely dramatic change over the last 7 weeks. The end of 53 years of Assad's brutal dynastic rule of Syria, couldn't really represent much more of a dramatic and strategic shift for Syria, for its people, and for the many challenges that are now in front of us all as individuals and as communities and as organizations that have a stake in that response. I think it's worth remembering in the context of this conversation that dramatic change came and comes after nearly 14 years of debilitating conflict. So this doesn't come after a brief civil war. And so when we consider the UXO challenge as well as the much wider challenge in terms of, as Najat was saying, refugee return, but also the return of displaced peoples, the challenge of considering reconstruction. There is significant HLP issues post-conflict. All of that has, and many other things, a direct linkage to the issue of unexploded ordnance and unexploded munitions. The scale of the conflict was immense. 50% of Syria's basic infrastructure is destroyed, including 30% of the housing. And so, again, when it comes even to detecting the scale and the spread of the UXO challenge, that really cannot be understated. There are significant parts of the country that have essentially been vacated for months, if not years. And it is that challenge of people returning that appears to have triggered this very significant escalation in terms of unexploded ordnance detonations. And so I'm sure you've probably already heard some data, but I have been collecting certainly my own. And I mean, in the last 3 weeks, I've counted 55 deaths, 88 injuries in 76 UXO incidents in 3 weeks, which is just, when you compare it to the scale of those incidents happening whilst the regime was still in control and the Syrian crisis was still as it was, just off the scale compared to the amount of UXO incidents that were happening prior to recent developments. So I would say, just a few other sort of comments in terms of this particular issue we're talking about. So I had an interesting conversation with the Syrian mission at the UN a few days ago, which obviously is the same mission that was there under the regime, but is now acting more or less under the authority of the transitional government. This is one of the big issues that's on their mind. They have been, I'm told, under significant conversations within the United Nations around permissions for access to, and now I'm not a technical expert here, but greater access to things like thermite that would be used in dealing with a lot of the demining challenges challenges. And so certainly I got from a wider conversation with the Syrian mission that this was something that was very much on their agenda, and sanctions clearly is an obstacle in that respect. There's obviously also a problem of resources and time. This is a transitional government being run by basically an armed group that until 7 weeks ago was governing somewhat effectively about 3% of Syrian territory. Now they find themselves in control of more than 80% of the country, with control over the economy, the central bank, dealing with sanctions, the international community. So this issue of UXO challenge and demining is one of 1,000 massive challenges on its table. So yes, it's certainly aware of the challenge. Yes, it's certainly concerned about it, but they do not have the expertise, they do not have the resources, and they certainly don't have the capability to deal with it themselves, which is where Halo and other organizations will have to fill that vacuum as best as they can, and they'll obviously require a significant increase in assistance and funding from the US government and from many others to allow that to be as effective as it needs to be. One other broader reflection before closing out would be to say we shouldn't forget on a broader level that the humanitarian and economic crisis that Syria was under Assad hasn't suddenly miraculously got better because Assad has left. Actually, what I'm hearing from aid agencies is that the humanitarian crisis in Syria has got even worse over the last 7 weeks. The UN-run aid mission in Damascus has taken a significant step back from its programming and activities across the country. And even then, under Assad's control, the UN's aid mission was less than 30% funded for 2025. So the humanitarian challenge here could not be greater. It is bigger than it's ever been after 14 years of crisis in Syria. And so again, as the US positions itself and begins to consider future funding and future responses to Syria, I cannot understate the immense enormity of the challenge more broadly when it comes to the humanitarian situation, of which this issue that we're here to talk about here is one significant contributing factor, which does risk, quite frankly, dissuading to an extent people from returning, and significantly complicates the wider assessments being made around potential limited early recovery and reconstruction, given the increasing challenge that's being presented by UXOs.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles, for those comments. And with that, we will begin the Q&A portion. We've got about 15 minutes or so left to answer your questions. Please feel free to drop questions into the chat, the little Q&A section. We've got lots of folks on the line and experts who are here ready to answer your questions. There's nothing too basic. If you want to know more about either the context in Syria, about the work of demining itself in terms of what that looks like, or really anything else that our experts are able to field. So don't be shy. Please drop those questions in the chat. As I have not seen anything come in yet, we will kind of kick it off with a few questions that have been submitted in advance. So to start off, the first question here is, how have the current Syrian authorities and the Syrian people as a whole reacted to a U.S. presence in the region in this specific way? And so we've talked a little bit about the Syrian authority reaction, but I'll open it up for additional comments as well as just broadly from the Syrian people reactions to these activities. Perhaps Najat, can we start with you and then perhaps go to Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment we see there's a lot of negotiations happening behind, and there's this question around sanctions which always emerge into the surface, which we hear a lot. So it's from the community, from who we've been talking, everyone seemed to be quite optimistic. So we do hope that there will be some agreement at some point, and trying to for me, I can talk about Northeast Syria. The US presence has been quite grand there. Were there. They've been supporting, especially around ISIS. So that has always been well established, and they have never been, it's been quite the opposite. They've been quite, everything has been going quite smooth, and they've been a strong actor. But I mean, globally speaking, from what we've been hearing, we do hope that there will be some positive dialogue happening behind, and that we will be able to kind of have like a whole of Syria, hopefully a response where everyone could help. But that's I mean, so far there've been some optimism.
Andrew, do you want to comment further?
Yeah, I think Charles is probably the best person to comment on this overall. But I just say from our staff perspective and the people we're encountering on the ground, they're very focused with their immediate concerns. You know, they're overjoyed at the fall of the regime. There's trepidation about what might follow, but there's an extremely positive attitude in the people. I would say, from what I've seen, and as I said, Charles is better qualified to comment, the current government and HTS have gone out of their way not to criticize the US. I think we should not forget that they are utterly inimical to ISIS, and I suspect they will want to see, although they may not say it publicly, a continued US presence dealing with ISIS in Syria, because it makes life a bit easier for them. But there's a degree of supposition on my part there. But we're not seeing anything either from the people, from our staff, from our beneficiaries, or from our interactions with the new authorities that suggest that there's any antipathy towards the US or any major concerns about their presence in the region.
Charles, do you want to weigh in as well?
Sure, I would just say, I mean, from the outset, just because Andrew just mentioned it, yes, I think in a strange sort of way, considering what HTS has been or was for a long time, I'm hearing that behind the scenes, they're quite open to the idea of the US retaining its military presence in the Northeast and directing that towards the counter-ISIS fight. I'm hearing secondhand that there may even have been some intelligence sharing already between the US and HTS and the transitional government on the de-ISIS file. So that's, you know, an intriguing thing to sort of follow up on. At the same time, though, our military presence is tied very specifically to the Syrian Democratic Forces, and we are coming to a crunch time right now as to whether or not there is going to be a working compromise deal between the transitional government in Damascus and the SDF as to the SDF's place in a post-Assad Syria. There is severe, acute conflict going on in eastern Aleppo right now between the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army and the SDF. And this is all coming very much to a head at the moment. The language coming from the transitional government in Damascus is that they want to prioritize diplomacy with the SDF, and they want to avoid, and for the first time they used the word civil war, they want to avoid a civil war with the SDF. And a lot of this, I think, concerning rhetoric should be seen as a negotiation tactic. But we are very much coming into a very significant crunch point. In which the US has a role to play. And then I would just reiterate a message that I think has already been made, which is the other thing that the US has a significant role to play in here is the issue of sanctions. And for anyone on the call who has any input on that issue, the vast majority of Syria country-specific sanctions enforced by the United States against Syria were, legally speaking, directed towards a government that was run by Bashar al-Assad. With that no longer being the case, there is very little legal reason to allow those sanctions to remain in place. It's extrajudicial to start placing conditions on a totally new transitional government to retain sanctions that were designed to punish a previous government. And that sanctions issue is really significant. The General License 24 that's been issued was a good first step, but it's temporary. Because it's temporary, it's unlikely to fix the de-risking issue that we've long faced with banks and financial institutions. And so a more permanent resolution to the sanctions issue is required if Syria has any hope of being able to rebuild itself and to stabilize the economy.
Thank you. And we do have a question that's come in. Can you speak about the training and requirements and timeline for new technicians, so deminers and folks doing this type of work, as well as how is the political environment affecting training and deploying new crops of technicians who can safely recover and destroy UXO? Any volunteers to
Shall I go first, Kristen?
That would be great. Thanks.
So the first thing is, at the moment, access is very easy. We're accessing Syria through Jordan. We are sending staff in without any challenge, and they're moving freely within the country. So there's no problem with sending specialists into Syria to conduct training. We also have a strong cohort already, although it's a small team who are well trained. So we're looking to expand operations and to conduct training courses within Syria. There are two elements of this. There's training people to clear landmines. That's relatively quick because really that most of them are trained just to locate landmines. So it's a course of around 1 month, and we can take civilians to do that. Explosive ordnance disposal is a bit trickier. It's a longer course, and we need to give them experience and monitor that. But we're looking to start those initial 1 month courses as soon as possible. Excuse me. And within Syria, and then we'll use international specialists and experienced staff to monitor those staff initially, probably over a period of another month. The one advantage of working in Syria is that there is so much unexploded ordnance to deal with that you can gain a vast amount of experience in a pretty short time. So we would expect to have Syrian highly skilled technicians, fully trained and operational and autonomous within Halo structure within 6 months.
Do others want to weigh in on that question?
Just maybe if I could add on the training element. So, I mean, in MAG, we have a standard training team in Northeast Syria where we keep, training our team, and also there's a mine action center in Northeast Syria. So we're also trying to build capacity of local National Mine Action Center. One of the area which was coming up very often during my visit is EOD level 3, as Andrew just mentioned. It's a very specialized area where it does require special skills. So this is one of the area which was really flagged as being one of the most needed specific kind of expertise at the moment. So as MAG, we are also ready to train, and we have the capacity. But that was one of the area which was very much in need in terms of training. I mean, most of our deminers are from the local communities, so but they are different levels. So the higher you are, you can do disposal of items. So you need to, there are different level of training to offer. So in terms of non-technical survey, that could be, quite easy to do, like mapping out contaminated area. But then when it comes to clearance, like again, that you can have some basic EOD1 level 2, but then when it comes to the actual disposal of the items, you need to have a specific skill, and that one needs a bit of more time, obviously, to train. And this is one of the area which was flagged by various partners that I've mentioned, that they are looking forward to get this kind of training. Over.
Thanks so much. Perhaps moving to the next question, starting with you, Charles, for a response is, during this time of transition, what are some of the metrics or things you're watching out for as metrics for progress and stability in Syria from the transition government? And maybe as you respond, you can mention if you see potential for perhaps a changing role for Syrian women in society, and speak to that a bit.
Gosh, that's a big question. I think, I mean, first of all, just to reiterate something I said earlier, which is, as far as transitional governments go, this one starts with an immediate disadvantage in that it's run by what remains an internationally designated terrorist organization. So that presents an immediate complicating challenge. All of the behavior, the rhetoric that we have seen from that group as far as outward-facing government decisions and announcements has so far been very encouraging, and that's why we've seen what I've described as a rush to Damascus over the last several weeks by much of the international community. I think they face really significant tests, though. One, first of all, was finding some kind of a workaround to the sanctions issue. And with the assistance, particularly as I understand, of the Qataris, the Turks, and the Saudis, we have now General License 24. We also have a waiver to most of the region to engage more widely with Syria and its government, despite the state sponsor of terrorism designation that also now remains in place. And I think all of those things are good, and that was a significant step forward by the transitional government in terms of opening up access to humanitarian assistance, foreign direct investment, particularly in the energy fields and electricity, and for stabilization. Another challenge they have is holding a national conference or a national dialogue. It's been discussed for weeks and repeatedly postponed, not for a lack of a desire to hold it, but because it is an enormous undertaking. They want at least 1,200 Syrians from every province of the country to be involved in this massive conference in Damascus, and there are continued conversations and, frankly, negotiations over who will be involved. On the issue of minority communities, I think most of the signs have been encouraging, especially considering who HTS is and where their history stands. So encouraging in that context. Massive challenges with regards to hundreds, if not thousands, of regime loyalists who have gone to ground and continue to show the signs of a sort of fledgling armed resistance. There was an attack last night, again in Latakia, that killed several of the transitional government forces. And so that on a security level is going to be a big concern, as well as ISIS, which was resurgent in 2024. And then finally, the issue of women. This is a difficult one. I get asked every time about this. I mean, again, considering who HTS is, it is a real challenge for Ahmed al-Shara, the leader, who I think is playing a constant balancing game. The head of the central bank is a woman, long-standing and well-known Syrian economist who's held previous positions in the finance ministry as well as the central bank. But progress has been pretty limited until now. They were willing to accept a female candidate for governor of Sueda in the south. Although I understand there was a little bit of a fight about that. So progress to be made for sure. If I'm trying to be pragmatic, I would say we need to give them time. Right now, they're on a kind of victory lap where Ahmed al-Shara is having to reward his own followers first, before potentially seeking to devolve power to more widely to the community. So I'm trying to be optimistic on that, but it is a challenge.
Thank you so much. I'm being told that we will get kicked off the Zoom right at 11. So I want to just take this opportunity to thank our panelists so much for taking the time to help educate us. Thank you, everyone, for attending from Congress, from the State Department, and everyone else on the line. Really, we appreciate your support. We look forward to working with you. You can find my email address as well as my counterpart's email address, Dave Bloom, from MAG. We're both Washington, D.C. based, so please feel free if you'd like some follow-up conversations or if you'd like to get in touch with our panelists, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you to Congresswoman Houlahan for providing remarks earlier. And yeah, we look forward to working with you to help provide greater awareness on these issues and help find solutions to making sure that we can create a safer and more secure Syria through demining. And if you are a House staff member and your boss is not yet on the Unexploded Ordnance / Demining Caucus, it's very bipartisan. It's focused on bipartisan issues as it relates to demining and related programs. It has 67 House members and is growing every week. So if you'd like to join, please reach out to the staff of Congresswoman Houlahan or Congressman Valadeo, the co-chairs. So thank you very much again. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to working with you to help create a more stable Syria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.